Welcome back to the channel, Hobby1 Kenobi here. In this video, I will be finishing up the 1/48 scale Sepecat Jaguar by Airfix. When building aircraft models, I usually save the ejection seat for later. Since I like to put extra detail into them, it's better to wait so I don't slow down progress on the rest of the build. One of my favorite fixes for ejection molded seats is to thin out the side walls. This is done by scraping the plastic away with a scalpel. Here you can see the left side is thinner than the right. Next, I clipped away the ejection handle. This will be replaced later. Thinning the walls results in a large space between the cushions and the walls. Now the cushion and other portions of the frame will be needed to be rebuilt. Now it's time to create the mini seat belts. These are made from Tamiya tape and photo-etched belt buckles. Here is the seat all finished up. Next, I primed the ejection seat with black primer from a spray can and started brush painting the details. For this kind of brush painting, I like to use Vallejo Model Color acrylic paints. These paints mix well and have a slightly longer drying time than Tamiya paints, which makes them useful for blending. The only drawback is that they are easily removed from the surface if you need to handle the part. Next, I masked up the ECM pod and sprayed the black sections. I absolutely love ECM pods and put them on any models when I get a chance. Now the model and various parts were ready for a gloss coat. I am now using the Tamiya Gloss Clear exclusively on models. After spraying the gloss, I realized I needed to paint on a false canopy on the underside of the aircraft. Despite having a few books on this aircraft, I wasn't able to find a clear picture of what the false canopy actually looked like. I decided to take an educated guess, masked off the area, then shot Tamiya NATO Black. Now the model was ready for decals. The kit came with many decals, but only one set that represented an aircraft evolved in the Gulf War. This aircraft was named Buster Gonad and had nose art with a man carrying, well, large gonads in a wheelbarrow. Though nose art like this is funny and probably quite therapeutic for the pilots involved in war, I couldn't picture myself showing the finished model to my 3 young children and being proud of it. I decided to order a set of aftermarket decals from Model Alliance Aviation Workshop Publications Limited. This decal set had 12 different sets of decals, all representing an aircraft from the Gulf War. I chose the decals for the avid Guardian reader. I found that the crew had disdain for that particular newspaper and decided to mock it. Also, it was one of the few that didn't feature a half-naked woman, Johnny Fart Pants, or gonads. The decals laid down nicely, only needing a small amount of decal setting solution. If you are not a fan of decals, this is the model for you. Next, the model received another coat of gloss to cover the decals and protect them from the upcoming oil wash. For washes, I use Winsor & Newton Artist Oil Paints. For this aircraft, I decided to use black and white and burnt umber to create a very dark gray with a slightly brown tone to it. The paint is thinned with turpenoid. The wash is applied to any rivets and crevices. At this moment, I would like to remind you to push that like button if you're enjoying this content. And if you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button. Okay, back to the model. As you apply the wash, you might start to notice that some areas on parts need thinner washes to allow the paint to flow around things like details. Sometimes it's best to have thicker paint so the pigment stays in place. Once the wash is dried, it is removed from the surfaces with Q-tips. I recommend stocking up on Q-tips. You will use these up fast. With the wash removed, I sprayed the model and parts with Tamiya Flat Clear. Next, I removed the mask from the cockpit and started to pull the tape off the windscreen and canopy. Any paint that found its way through the tape was pushed away with a toothpick. I gave the clear parts a quick buffing with the Dremel tool. The kit comes with FOD covers. However, the aircraft had two different types of covers, a set with a hard shell and a set that was essentially a large cushion. Most of my references showed the cushion-style covers being used at bases during the Gulf War. Another difference with these types of FOD covers was that the hard kind sat flush inside the intake, while the cushion style stuck out just a little bit. I decided to cover the hard shell style covers provided in the kit with Magic Sculpt. Once dried, I painted them red and pressed them into the model intakes. The engine exhausts were painted separately then pressed into position. No glue was needed. Next, I placed the wheel struts into the wells. They fit well, but I did have to fuss with them just a little bit. I found that the Gulf War Jaguars were painted in the desert pink scheme mere days before they left for the Middle East. I have seen many photos showing the fuel tanks with a fair amount of paint chipping off. I decided to replicate this first with oil paint supplied with a brush and a sponge. Although I could have refined this work, it wasn't quite looking the way I had hoped. I decided to use a technique called hairspray chipping to create this effect. First, I repainted the tanks in the vehicle's original paint scheme, gray and dark green. When it was dried, I sprayed the parts with a Tresemme brand hairspray. I chose a weaker compound of the hairspray so that it could more easily be removed. After the hairspray dried, I sprayed one tank the desert pink and the other a slightly lighter version of that desert pink. I wanted to make their color slightly off since they were quickly painted in the field and since the tanks would be swapped to different aircraft. I then let these dry. Finally, I applied water to the recently painted tanks and broke the brittle paint and hairspray with a scrub brush. And here is the effect. The vehicle showed a lot of wear all over, and I decided to replicate this with artist oils. I also used the oils to adjust the tone of different panels and flicked heavily thinned paint against a toothbrush to create various splatter effects. Next, I set out to create a base for the model. I started by taping off the edges. Then I coated the area with modeling paste and sanded away any imperfections. Then I airbrushed a light gray. I sprayed lighter and darker tones of the gray and various light sand colors in patches. I then mixed light brown artist oil paint and applied it in patches around the base. Then I dabbed it up with paper towels. Next, I sketched out where lines would go on the base. I used references to decide the size of the large rectangles and yellow stripes found on the airbase where these vehicles were stationed. I used a ruler and a sculpting tool to scribe into the base. I then used AK pencils to darken the lines. Finally, some spills and leaks are imitated by splattering and dropping heavily thinned artist oils on the base. It was now time to start putting many of the pieces onto the model. The windscreen was glued using PVA white glue. The tanks and ECM pods were glued using CA glue. And finally, the canopy was glued in place, and with that, the model is finished. I really enjoyed this kit and plan to build another one in the future. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this content, please leave a like and a subscribe. It helps out my channel a whole lot. Well, that's it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.